Welcome to another TOEFL listening practice video. In this video, you will listen to a lecture, answer some questions about it, review the correct answers and explanations. Don't forget to subscribe for more TOEFL listening practice.
Gothic architecture is one of the most recognizable architectural styles of the medieval period in Europe. I'm sure most of you have seen images of Gothic cathedrals or maybe even visited one. You know, those towering structures with pointed arches, large stained glass windows, and intricate stone carvings. Gothic architecture originated in France in the mid-12th century, with some citing the renovation of the Basilica of Saint-Denis as its beginning. Saint-Denis was significant as a royal burial site, and Abbot Suger sought to redesign it to evoke grandeur and light, aiming to create an awe-inspiring space that would lift people's spirits toward the divine. Gothic architecture was fundamentally different from what came before. Up until this period, European architecture was mostly in the Romanesque style. They were typically characterized by rounded arches, thick walls, and small windows, which made the interiors rather dark. And structurally, Romanesque buildings were limited by their own weight. Those thick walls were needed to support the heavy stone roofs, so the buildings were solid but also quite heavy and somewhat closed in. In contrast, Gothic architecture introduced some revolutionary techniques that allowed architects to build taller, more open, and most importantly, brighter spaces. So what changed? Well, the Gothic style developed alongside a few key engineering innovations, and one of the most important of these innovations was the pointed arch. Unlike the rounded arch used in Romanesque structures, a pointed arch can distribute weight more effectively. This means that, rather than all the weight pressing straight down, it spreads outward, allowing for greater height and larger, more open interior spaces. Next came the ribbed vault, an innovation where intersecting pointed arches created a skeletal ceiling framework. This structure directed weight along specific ribs, allowing for lighter ceilings without sacrificing stability. Ribbed vaults opened up possibilities for larger, more complex buildings. Another key feature, and maybe the most visually dramatic of Gothic architecture, is the flying buttress. Flying buttresses are these arched supports you see extending outward from the main walls of the building, connecting at key points to transfer weight away from the walls. This was a game changer because it meant that the walls themselves no longer had to support the entire weight of the roof. This innovation freed up space in the walls for another hallmark of Gothic architecture, massive stained glass windows. Imagine the impact at the time. Architects could build walls of glass instead of solid stone. This transformed dark, cramped interiors into vast, light-filled spaces with colorful stained glass windows depicting biblical scenes and religious stories. Since many people couldn't read, these windows served as visual storytelling tools, teaching and inspiring all who entered. Now, with these engineering innovations in place, Gothic architecture spread across Europe and developed slightly different styles in different regions. For example, in England, we see the emergence of what's called the perpendicular Gothic style, which emphasized strong vertical lines. Structures like the Westminster Abbey or the Canterbury Cathedral exemplify this style with their emphasis on height and a more linear, almost grid-like arrangement of stone and glass. In France, on the other hand, we have what's known as rayonnant Gothic, a style focused on extreme delicacy and lightness. The famous Sainte-Chapelle in Paris is a great example of this. It's almost entirely made of stained glass, with walls so thin they seem to dissolve into the light. So, depending on where you were in Europe, you'd see these regional variations on the basic Gothic principles. And we should also mention Gothic sculpture and decoration. You know, those intricate carvings of saints, kings, animals, and those sometimes unsettling gargoyles. They served both decorative and symbolic purposes. The gargoyles, for example, were often waterspouts, channeling rain away from the building. But they also had this symbolic aspect, representing evil spirits that the sacred space of the cathedral would repel. It's as if they were protecting the church. By the 15th century, Gothic architecture began to evolve once again, becoming even more elaborate in what we call the flamboyant Gothic style. This was especially popular in France and Spain, where we see these highly intricate patterns, almost lace-like in appearance. But around this time, the Renaissance was beginning in Italy, bringing with it a return to classical principles like balance and proportion. Slowly, the elaborate style of Gothic architecture fell out of favor. The legacy of Gothic architecture endures, despite being replaced by Renaissance and Baroque styles. In the 19th century, the Gothic revival movement brought back key features like pointed arches, ribbed vaults, and flying buttresses, influencing modern architecture. The Houses of Parliament in London are a prime example of this revival.
One, what is the main focus of the lecture? 2. According to the professor, where did Gothic architecture first emerge? 3. Why did Abbot Suger seek to redesign the Basilica of Saint Denis? 4. What is the professor's opinion on the innovation of flying buttresses? 5. Which two Gothic styles are mentioned in the lecture? 6. What can be inferred about the impact of Gothic architecture on its time?